Yo, what's happening? Hello, I'm Zaccura and welcome back to my channel and to a new study session video. It's been a while since I did one of these, hasn't it? Something like 6 months, I think. I've just been so busy with projects that I hadn't had time to just sit down and do some good old-fashioned art studies. But now that most of my projects have settled down, it's time for me to get back into the study grind. So hopefully we can revive this study with your buddy Zacky series because I really enjoy it and I know some of you do too. But anyway, today's study session is one that was not a suggestion because you know I'm edgy like that, gotta choose the one subject that nobody suggested I do, but it is on landscape impressions. Now, I'm not actually sure that's what this type of study is called, but that's what I'm calling it because it basically describes exactly what you do. And what it is you do a bunch of quick photo studies of landscapes or environments. And the emphasis is on the quick part because the point of this exercise is not to create a polished illustration, but to train yourself to break a large picture down into manageable shapes, colors, and textures. So by putting something of a time limit on yourself, it really forces you to only focus on what are the most important things to paint in order to give the same impression of the picture without getting distracted by all the details. The reason I decided to do a landscape impression study session was actually because I was scrolling through Instagram last week and I came across another artist who had just done some themselves and they were beautiful, and I figured, you know what, I think it's about time for me to get comfortable with drawing backgrounds. It's something that I, like many artists, tend to avoid because I don't enjoy it as much as drawing characters. But I think that often the reason we don't enjoy drawing certain things is just because they're difficult for us. I used to hate drawing hands. Now I really enjoy drawing hands, and the only reason is because I've drawn them enough times for them to be comfortable for me now. So I had a feeling backgrounds were no different. It's just something that I need to practice enough to get comfortable with. And it's 2019. It's time to get over this fear of drawing backgrounds and get comfy with it. What I didn't expect going into this study session was how fun it would be. Hands down, one of the most fun study sessions I have ever done, both on YouTube and off. Totally wish I had done it earlier. And I'll come back to this point later, but first let me just explain how I went about this study session. So in total, I did 3 photo-referenced studies. I went online as well as looked through my already downloaded reference photos that I collect and always forget to use, and I chose a few that I thought would be good subjects to draw. All 3 of them were at different times of the day with different subject matter and colors. I made sure to paste the picture into my drawing program directly onto the canvas, and then I created an equally sized box next to the photo, which I then filled in with some kind of mid-tone that I picked from the photo, and then I started painting. Filling in the canvas area with a mid-tone was actually one of the most important things I learned from this, funny enough. I have always heard artists say that you shouldn't work on a purely white or purely black canvas because it makes it harder for you to perceive lights and darks properly. But I kinda just never really listened. I always tend to draw directly on a white canvas even when I'm doing backgrounds, but with these studies I figured, you know, I'm gonna do it completely right this time, so I filled it in, and I can tell you right now, it makes a huge difference. It made it so much easier to paint. I guess I just kind of never believed it made much of a difference before because I was like, well, it's gonna get painted over anyway, so what's the point in coloring it in with something? Oh, the regret. It really did make it so much easier for me to work, and it's such a simple thing too, like just fill in your canvas. That's it. And it helps so much. Another thing I made sure to do when I did these studies was to not zoom in. I made sure to always have the entire canvas area that I was working on visible, and actually purposefully made it pretty far away because what this allowed me to do was pick out the large shapes in the photo. I mean, you can't get distracted by the details if you can't see them, right? This definitely made the whole process much faster and easier. I just tried to focus on blocky shapes that each thing in the photo created. One of the major things you study when you do landscape impressions is actually the colors. But again, you're trying to simplify the colors into blocky, manageable things, which is, again, a lot easier when you're zoomed out. When it came to actually picking the colors, I did it differently for each of the 3 pieces I did. In the first piece, I completely color picked the colors directly from the photo. I did not try to guess and pick the colors myself. I completely just stole them right off of the photo. But I made sure to pay attention to what these colors were, like what parts of the color wheel were they on and what were their values. This was sort of my way of knocking out my preconceived ideas of what color things should be and just paying attention to what they actually are. And by using them to recreate the photo, it serves to really prove it to myself. Then, when I moved on to the second piece, which was actually a screenshot of my home screen, sorry Microsoft, I tried to pick my own colors first, but I didn't actually paint with them. What I did was pick the color in my primary color swatch area, then I'd switch to my secondary color swatch and pick the actual color off of the photo. This way I could see the difference of what I thought the color was versus what it actually is. If you're an artist, you've probably heard other artists talk about like perceived color versus actual color, usually saying something along the lines of, grass isn't always green and the sky isn't always blue. But even though that's something that I know in my head, and I try to make sure I'm using actual colors, I can still see that I make the mistake of going with colors that I think things should be rather than what they actually are all the time in my illustrations. Over time, I've learned a few clever tricks to make my illustrations look nice despite this habit, but this has always limited me to very specific feelings in my illustrations that I tend to have to fall back on each and every time. And there's nothing wrong with those feelings. The fact that I developed those tricks was probably because I naturally tend to lean towards that kind of impact anyway. But it can be frustrating sometimes when I have an idea in my head, but I simply can't make it happen when I draw. And then as a way of saving the illustration, I would always end up falling back on those tricks. That's actually the reason why some of you may have noticed that I tend to use a lot of purple in my work, because I just happened to learn how to use purple in a way that looks good. But as much as I love purple, one of my favorite colors, I also want to be able to do that with any color, not just purple. Making a nice looking illustration is nice, but making a nice illustration you intended to make is better. By the end of the second study, I was already getting the hang of picking out the simple shapes in the photo and applying the colors properly. So then for the final photo referenced piece, I finally dropped the eyedropper tool altogether and completely picked the colors on my own, completely eyeballed the whole thing. And I was really surprised at how much I actually wasn't struggling. Over the last 2 pieces, by paying attention to the colors I was using, I had already started looking at these photos differently. I was able to pick out actual colors much easier than I had ever before. Admittedly, the hot air balloon itself is kind of a total train wreck because I didn't know what to do with all those blocks of color, but the background at least was surprisingly easy for me to recreate the impression of. Now, when I've seen other artists do landscape impression studies, they tend to like to set a timer for themselves. It's almost like a gesture drawing, but for landscapes. Usually each photo study shouldn't take longer than about 15 minutes, but these admittedly ended up taking me nearly an hour each. Honestly, the point is to just be quick, meaning don't start seriously rendering or working out details. But quick, as I've found, can be pretty subjective. These were my first time doing these types of studies, so it took me a while to even figure out how to go about it. In particular, which brushes to use. This was kind of a side study session, but I had also just recently downloaded a bunch of new brushes, so these studies were also me trying to figure out which brush is best for what. So I tried to not pay attention at all to how long these actually took me, as long as I made sure I was only focusing on the gesture of the landscapes and I was only paying attention to what are the most important things to paint in order to recreate the same impression as the photo. Even though I still need to do way more of these photo studies, after doing these 3, I decided to try to use what I had just learned to create a from-scratch illustration, meaning no more photo references. Even though there's absolutely nothing wrong with using a photo reference in your made-up illustrations, this particular time I wanted to see how much of what I learned was retained in my head, and see if I was able to create something new while also using this new knowledge. And to really put into perspective of how much what I learned actually helped at all, I decided to take a journey down memory lane and find an old abandoned illustration from my past that I have never finished because I couldn't get the background right. Which leads us to this. Ta-da! This was an illustration I painted, or rather I started painting in 2016, and I never bothered to finish it because that background was not happening. So now, 3 years later, with my newfound skills, it's time to finish what I started. Or redraw it, rather. As I've mentioned in previous study session videos, breaking objects down into their basic shapes is super important when you draw anything. You need to understand the fundamental structure of whatever it is you're drawing before you start putting details, so that you can have a properly proportioned end result. But that was always something that I personally struggled with a lot when it came to backgrounds, or just environments in general. I always felt like there was just so much going on. There's no solid object, or rather there are too many solid objects all interacting with each other that I'd get really lost when it came to tackling a scene. I felt like in order to draw a proper scene, I'd have to know how to draw each object in it separately first, and then spend a long time applying them all into one drawing, and then work out how the lighting and colors would affect each object separately. And that kind of thinking is what usually made doing backgrounds feel like a pain in the backside. It seemed so tedious and time-consuming, and I'd much rather just draw the characters without any background. And I know that this feeling is not unique to me. I know countless artists that hate drawing backgrounds. Honestly, it needs to be a meme because of how common it is, and if it is a meme, show me it. I gotta see this. And I have a feeling the reason why so many of us hate drawing backgrounds is for the same reasons I just mentioned. But what this study session really taught me was that a background is a single object. It's no different than if I were to draw a figure. I don't need to know perfectly how to draw hands and feet and arms and heads and legs in order to do some figure drawings or gesture drawings. It's true that when you focus on smaller things and get comfortable with them individually, it makes it easier when applying them to larger things that have those smaller things in it, but that doesn't mean that the larger thing isn't a single object in itself. A body is one thing. It's true that it's composed of hands and feet and a head and so on, but altogether, it's still a body. And that's actually the point of figure and gesture drawing, to realize that all the parts of a body create one single object. This way, it doesn't just look like a stiff mannequin with arms and legs stiffly attached to it. And backgrounds, environments, landscapes, they're no different. It can be made up of a lot of different things, but altogether they make one picture, one environment, one object. I think the big reason why it was always so much harder for me to treat backgrounds as one thing was because when I draw anything else, I work with lines, as do many artists do if they have their foundations in drawing rather than painting. I pick out or I visualize 3D objects, and then I draw the lines around them. But most of what's going on in an environment is just the effect of light and shadow. A lot of the shapes that appear don't actually have a tangible solid object. So in order to break the scene down into manageable shapes, you have to think of it as zones or planes of value and color, rather than edges like I'm so accustomed to. What I had always done before was to try my best to pick out edges and outlines, and if you try to do that with a scene, well, good luck, because there's going to be a million of them in a single tree branch alone. Not to mention coloring in each and every element one by one will take forever. But if you don't try to stubbornly find those edges and objects and instead focus on picking out the differences in value and color, you'll start to see much larger, simpler, and manageable shapes appear right in front of you. And all of a sudden, drawing an environment isn't tedious at all. Honestly, in this illustration, I'd say only about 30% of my time was spent on the background. The other 70% was just on the character. Admittedly, it's a relatively simple background with not that many objects in it, but just look at how much impact these simple things created, all because of how well they all work together to create a single object, a single background. You could treat it as a takeout menu of things like one sunset, a few telephone poles, some mountains, and a semi-clear sky. But it's how all of these elements create one single scene cohesively that makes it impactful. As I said before, doing these landscape studies were some of the most fun study sessions I've done, and that's coming from someone who really didn't expect it to be. I thought studying backgrounds was going to be a drag, but instead it was simple, fast, and hugely rewarding. What a surprise. At least learning the impressions of landscapes was. Of course, there's still a lot of other things that has to do with rendering and texture I'd need to learn if I want to create more detailed environments. But being able to break down a scene into a manageable thing was one of the hardest things for me before, and now that I can, it yields some awesome results. In particular for me, specifically when it came to the colors, I have a habit of oversaturating everything. This probably has to do with my background in drawing anime and cartoon characters, but I noticed that in all of the photo studies I did, almost all of the colors were more near the left of the color square, meaning leaning more towards gray rather than the fully saturated versions of itself. And yet the end result still seems so colorful and bright. And that's because it's all about how the colors look next to all of the other colors in the picture. But I'll save any more color theory talk for a future video, if and when I make a color study session video. For now, I'm just really happy with this study session, and I am so surprised at how much I learned from just 3 photo studies. I still need to do like so many more. Like I want to do more also, but wow, I so wish I had done this study session earlier. And that brings us to the homework part of this video. If you are new to my channel or just new to this series, then you may not know this, but at the end of each of these study session vids, I like to prescribe to my viewers a homework assignment. You don't have to do it, obviously, because I'm your buddy, not your teacher, but these are just things that I recommend and suggest you guys try out for yourself to help you improve with your art. So, Zacky's homework assignment for this video is to do basically the same thing I did. Pick 3 landscape photos that you like and do quick digital impression studies of them. If you can, try to find photos with minimal to preferably 0 photoshopping touch-ups. I know that they can be really hard to find online, so just try to find photos that look like something that would be possible to see with your own eyes in real life, because these will help you really learn how to study real environments. For the first photo study, don't worry about picking your own colors. Pick them right off of the photo. Don't feel bad about it, you're studying here, but try to pay attention to what these colors are. Don't just pick and paint. Be sure to have your color wheel open so you can see where these colors lie on that wheel. For the second photo study, try to pick colors on your own, But then be sure to also pick the actual color off of the photo so you can compare how off or how accurate you were in your perception of the colors. For the third photo study, try not to use the eyedropper tool at all and completely eyeball the entire thing. In all three cases, try to not zoom in too much and really putting your attention on the large shapes that make up the picture. Remember, these are impression studies. Your trees and mountains don't have to look perfect. They don't need to be the exact same size or shape, they just need to give the same impression as the mountains and trees do in the photos. I don't want to give you guys any time limits this time because I can totally see this being different for each and every person, but try to think quick. Don't let yourself get caught up in having everything perfectly match the photo. And that's it! This is one of the rare cases where I do fully recommend this study be done digitally if you can, because you can easily study the colors by using the eyedropper tool, but feel free to do these studies traditionally if you want to or if you just don't have digital equipment, but just know that it will be a little bit more difficult because you'll basically be forced to skip the first two photo studies and just go right into eyeballing everything yourself. If I can give any tip to help with color picking true colors in that case, it would be to make a tiny pinhole shape with your hand and look through it like a telescope, being sure to block out any other colors in your view and focusing only on a tiny little area of your photo. That will give you the true color and value of any area on your photo. And if you do your homework, be sure to share it and tag me because I would love to see it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys thought about it in the comments. This study session was so much fun and I strongly encourage you guys to give it a try. You will not regret it. If you did enjoy this video in any way, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit the little bell to stay notified for when I upload. I make new videos every week. If you want to follow me on social media, all the links to that are in the description box where you can follow me for regular updates. Here's the final piece side by side with the never finished 2016 version, and wow! I mean, it's true that I didn't actually finish the 2016 version, but still, y'all, I am much happier with my 2019 version. And until next time, stay awesome, stay inspired, always. See ya!